We're looking at the book of Joshua, remembering now that in terms of a type, what it means in the lives of a new covenant, New Testament believer, is that in this world, you're going to have to fight. It's an odd reality, isn't it? That we sit back and think, wow, God could fight our battles for us way better than we could fight them ourselves. But that was never God's plan. Instead of us sitting back and him fighting our battles, he instructs us on the proper methods of fighting. And Joshua, the book of Joshua is a perfect example of that. Let me give you the larger picture. So clearly God says that this land is Israel's land. I've given it to them. Now go in and fight for it. You're like, wait a minute. Lord, you gave it to us. Why don't you just drive everybody out? Cause everybody in the land to drop on the ground. We'll come in, we'll bury all the bodies, and we'll take the land. It's not the way God works. Could God do it? Absolutely. But that's not the way God works. He has to give us something to fight for. Anything worth having is worth. Listen, if I'm going to be up here all by myself and do this this ain't going to work. If it's worth having, it's worth fighting for. And God wants, why does God want us to fight for things we believe in or fight for things that are worth having? Well, because number one, he has to keep us out of trouble, so he gives us something to do to keep busy. But it helps us know what's worth fighting for. Because ultimately, you won't fight for something if it's not worth it. So it's a revelation of what matters to you, isn't it? Isn't it a revelation of what matters to you, what things you fight for? See, sometimes we find ourselves fighting for things that we shouldn't be fighting for. We fight for all the wrong things. So look at this chapter again now. We've already covered chapter 1. If you didn't hear chapter 1, I'd encourage you to go back and 2 messages, chapter 1. They were as much a revelation to me as they were to you, and not that I'd never studied or read the book of Joshua before, but the Lord spoke to me in those 2 chapters and has spoken to me again, or is speaking to me now. Let's read chapter 2 together, and then we'll break it down and look at it. This is we're introduced to a character named Rahab. So Joshua the son of Nun sent out 2 men from an acacia grove, to spy secretly, saying, "Go and view the land, especially Jericho." So they went and came to the house of the harlot named Rahab, and they lodged there. And it was told to the king of Jericho, saying, "Behold, men have come here tonight from the children of Israel to search out our country." So the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, "Bring out the men whom have come to you, who have entered your house, for they have come to search out our country." So then the woman took the 2 men, the 2 spies, and she hid them. And so she said, "Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they were from." And as it happened, as the gate was being shut, when it was dark, that the men went out, where the men and I, and she's now telling the story, where the men and I, that I did not know. So you should go and pursue them quickly, because you might be able to yet overtake them. Maybe they're not too far away, all the while knowing, verse 6, that she had brought them up to the roof and hidden them with the stalks of flax, which she had laid in order on the roof. And then the men pursued them, that is, the men of the king of Jericho pursued the spies along the road to the Jordan, toward the Jordan River, to the east, toward the fords, it's called. And as soon as those who pursued them had gone out, they shut the gate. Now before they lay down, before she went to bed to sleep at night, she came up to the roof to speak to the spies. She said to the men, "I know that the Lord has given you the land." Now she's speaking of the land of Israel. And she says, "I know that the Lord has given you the land, that the terror of you has fallen, you and your people, has fallen on us, my people, and that all the inhabitants of the land are now faint-hearted because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were on the other side of the Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. And as soon as we heard these things, our hearts melted, neither did there remain in us courage in anyone because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Now therefore I beg you, swear to me by the Lord, since I have shown you kindness, that you also will show me kindness to my father's house, and give me a true token, and spare my father, my mother, my brothers, my sisters, and all that they have, and deliver our lives from death. So the men answered her, our lives for yours, if none of you tell this business of ours. And it shall be, when the Lord has given us the land, that we will deal kindly and truthfully or truly with you. And then she let them down out of the window by a rope, for her house was on the city wall, and she dwelt on the wall. She said to them, get to the mountain, head out to the mountain, lest the pursuers meet you. Hide there 3 days until the pursuers have returned. Afterward, you may go your way. So the men said to her, we will be blameless of this oath of yours, which you have made us swear, unless when we come into the land, you bind this line of scarlet cord to the window through which you let us down, and unless you bring your father, your mother, and your brothers, and all your father's household to your own home. So it shall be that whoever goes outside the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own head, and we will be guiltless. And whoever is with you in the house, his blood shall be on our head, if a hand is laid upon them. And if you tell this business of ours, then we will be free from this oath which you have made us swear. Then she said, according to your word, so it'll be. And she sent them away, and they departed. And she bound the scarlet cord in the window, and they departed, and they went to the mountain and stayed there 3 days until the pursuers returned. The pursuers sought them all along the way, but did not find them. So the two men returned and descended from the mountain and crossed over, and they came to Joshua the son of Nun and told him all that had befallen them. And they said to Joshua, truly the Lord has delivered all the land into our hands, for indeed all the inhabitants of the country are now faint-hearted due directly to us. And so I'll remind you that in Joshua 1:10, Joshua had commanded the officers and everyone to assemble and get ready to cross over into the Jordan. And he had said them that they should prepare provisions for yourselves, because specifically he said, within 3 days you will cross over this Jordan to go in and possess the land which, quote, the Lord your God is giving you to possess, close quote. So what Joshua had done is told them, stand here 3 days. I've sent some spies out. You stay, get ready, because when they come back, and you'll see that they spend 3 days there hiding out, and that they come back and they give the word. And so when they get back, we'll see what happens afterwards. But now in verse 1, chapter 2, Joshua the son of Nun sent out the two men from the acacia grove by the fords to spy out secretly, saying, go and view the land, especially Jericho. Why Jericho? Well, in terms of a strategic nature, if they would defeat Jericho, that would continue the faint-hearted condition of the people of Jericho throughout the land. It would be like the initial conquering within the borders of the land that God had given them. You see, the two other princes or kings of the Amorites who they'd already defeated was good enough at least to shake the hearts of those of Jericho. And now a defeat in Jericho would be an important first strike, if you will, in the land that God had promised them. If they could defeat Jericho, everyone else within the borders of Israel would truly be worried at that point. So they went and they came to the house of a harlot named Rahab and lodged there. And as it was the case in Numbers 13, if you remember from Numbers 13, spies would be utilized as an intelligence gathering arm of a military campaign. We saw that when they were outside the Promised Land, and Moses had, this is many, many years ago now, some 39 plus years ago, almost 40 years earlier, that they had sent out a group of spies into the land, and it was God who told Moses to send the spies out. And you remember 10 of the spies came back with a fearful report, and all they could talk about was how big the giants were. You remember this story? But two of them came back with a positive report, and they said, yeah, that's all true. But you know what? It's as God said. There was the grapes the size of whatever, and the honey, and it's flowing with milk and honey, and yeah, there's giants, but you know what? Who cares? Because God gave us the land. Let's just go in. Ultimately, they erred, and they chose to listen to the wrong group of spies there, and ended up then spending 40 years in the wilderness, and that was unfortunate. And the result of which also was that all those 20 years of age and older must first pass away before the people could inhabit the promised land. And the reason for that was because those were held accountable. Who made the decisions were 20 and above. So they went out as spies, and to me, again, as I think about this, it's remarkable that God, has us do these things. And I'm thinking, you know what, again, God, you've given us this land. We could all just stand here on this side of the Jordan and wait until we watch everyone from the other side of the Jordan march across this Jordan out into Syria and disappear, and then we'll go in, but it's not the way the Lord works. And we do see some things like that happen in other places, but God, when he calls us to fight for something, he wants us to be part of the battle. And so he uses us to fight the battles, but the war is already won. And it's an odd thing to think that you still have to fight even though the war is already won, but that's exactly what God wants for us. If you think about the purpose in our lives of the church, it's a place where we organize to fight our earthly battles. I'm here to equip you to fight your earthly battles from a point of view of having already won the war. But I'm here to tell you, no, you still have to fight. And there's going to be bloodshed, and it's going to get ugly. But it's worth fighting for if you're fighting the battles God has called you to fight. And again, that's the purpose or the larger point, that he wants us to take that which he's already given to us. He wants us to take it, even though he's already given it to us. We got to go take. We have to cooperate. We have to work together with God. I'm not a name it and claim it guy. I'm telling you right now, it's not me. It's not what I'm saying. But there's a point of view where he needs our faith to go in and sort of go before us. We have to come to a place where we literally believe that we've won before we can obtain what he's already given to us. You understand? And so anything worth having is worth fighting for, and anything given to us without a fight is treated by us even as though it has no worth. Did you ever notice that? When you get something and you don't have to give anything for it, you have a tendency to treat it as though it's worthless. But when there's something that costs you something, that's why David would later say that, I will not offer to the Lord that which costs me nothing. It's meaningless to me to offer him a heifer that you gave me and I didn't pay for it. It doesn't mean anything to me. In verse 2, so here come the two spies, and now the king of Jericho finds out, and I'll comment, by the way, on Rahab in a moment. I'll leave her alone for just a moment. And so he hears, the king of Jericho does, that, behold, some spies have entered into his country, and now I notice by this that the enemy is allowed by God to find things out and to know what we're up to sometimes. So even vulnerability in the midst of the battle is permitted by God. He allows us sometimes to find out that we put ourselves in vulnerable situations. The more vulnerable situation we find ourselves in at times, the more we're praising him once we've been delivered, because we saw the tenuous nature of our circumstances. And so verse 3, the king of Jericho sent out to the home of Rahab, saying, bring out the men who have come to you, who have entered your house, for they have come, and he knows right away, to search out, to spy out. Now, this is interesting to me because we're on the precipice of an important decision that Rahab's going to make. But first I'll note that we must, as we're overtaking the land, as we're coming in to a foreign, to a non-saved environment, to a group of people perhaps that are enemies of God, we must always remember that every one of them are potential Christians. That every one of them, God in his mind and heart, would love to see them receive the gift of love and salvation that he wants to give them. And so while we look at enemies as people we have to fight against, at the same time, we have to understand and realize that they're the objects of God's affection at the very same time. Very, very interesting perspective. We have to balance out our instinct to fight against people with our desire to see them convert and have their sin put there on the cross with Christ. So the woman who had taken the men in, she hid them. And now answering the king, she says, yes, the men did come to me, in fact. And then she says this, but I did not know where they came from. Liar, liar, skirt on fire, I think, is what I'm thinking right now. Rahab the harlot told a lie right there, right? Now, it should be noted that according to verse 1, the harlot, the word harlot, that's kind of a word we don't use a lot. She's a hooker, okay? You guys got to know exactly what she did for a living. She allowed men to hire her for sexual favors. That's what she did. That's who she was. And now here, these men, two spies of Joshua's highest level, military, confidants, those who he put his confidence in, are there lodging with her. Now, in one sense, it kind of makes sense, If you're going to go stay at the harlot's house, you want to go there and you don't want anyone to know who you are. So you're going to look kind of shady going in, right? So it's obvious. You don't want anyone to see you going in. You don't want anyone to know who you are. So it kind of makes sense. Now, I don't think that was part of the intent or purpose, but I do find it interesting. But the question then arises, is it sin to lie to the enemy? Now, in the passage of Scripture, we're not told anything condemning about it or nothing praiseworthy about the fact that she lied to the king. But what we are being clued into and made aware of here is that there's a woman who is choosing which side to be on in the midst of danger. Now, there's no condoning her methods. We're not told, we're not left anywhere in here to work out what would have happened if she decided in her heart beforehand, you know what, I will not lie. God's going to have to work this out another way and refuse to lie. We don't know what would have happened. What we do know is that she sinned, and it's still sin. Doesn't matter who it was or what purpose it was for. But at some point, every one of us makes that choice, and doubtless we have compromised in the midst of that choosing. Which side are we on? Am I the property and possession of the Lord's, or am I the property and possession of the world? Whose side am I on? We all err in the midst of that process of making those choices. I think I can figure out some of the places I've erred in the midst of those things. As we go on in verse 5, it happened as the gate was being shut. Remember, she lived on the wall, right? She lived there on the wall. So as the gate was being shut, when it was dark, that the men went out after being told, nope, they're not here, don't know where they were from. And she said, where the men went, I do not know, she said. I don't know where these two men went. Another lie. And then she said, well, you should get after it quickly. You might still be able to catch them. Get after it quickly, for you may yet find them. And now, again, this is misdirection, which is another way of saying lying. it's telling them encouraging them to go someplace else other than where they might be. And that is absolute deception. It's just misdirection is another word for deception. It's deceiving. Again, she's lying. Then in parentheses there, verse 6 is an entire parenthetical statement, and it says, but she had already brought them up on the roof and hid them amidst or under the stalks of flax, which she had laid out in order on the roof. So then these men, they went off, the king of Jericho's men, they went and pursued the two spies along the road to the Jordan. This would have been the road that if they had left, they would have been, if they were going back to the other side of the Jordan where their people were, right? It would have been the way that they'd gone. So you'll notice in a minute, she sends the two spies off a different way into the mountain rather than along the road so that they wouldn't get caught. All along the way, she's chosen a side. She's chosen a side, right? The men pursued them by the road, by the Jordan, to the fords. And as soon as those who had pursued them had gone out, then they shut the gate. Verse 8. Now, before they lay down for the evening, she came up onto the roof where she'd hid them and said to the men, I know that the Lord, now this is the first clue we get in verse 8 here as to why she has chosen what she has chosen. She was faced between what she knew, what she believed in her heart was going to happen to her people if when Israel crosses the Jordan. She had already come to a conclusion and a decision of what she believed. And now we're being told why she believed it. Verse 8. Before they lay down, she came up to the roof and told them, verse 9, and said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you and your people has fallen now on us, and that all the inhabitants, my people, of the land have become faint of heart because of you. So, I'm thinking the 128 nations at the United Nations should listen, maybe perhaps, and read some of Rahab's notes. Maybe the Palestinians should read some of Rahab's notes. But the weariness of the enemy is evidence of God has made a choice. She perceives the faint-heartedness of her own people as an evidence that the God of the Israelites is real. That in the face of being overtaken by God's people, her people have become fearful. And she sees that as an evidence and points to it as an evidence. And in her statement, she also confesses, and if you read back to verse 9 again, that she believes there is a God, number one, that's very clear, that she said God has the authority to give and to take away the land, speaking specifically of, and that her own people are now afraid because of his people and because of him. Reminds me of two Proverbs in particular, beginning with Proverbs 9:10, which says that fear is the beginning of wisdom. I see the fear in the people of Jericho, specifically Rahab, as God's opportunity to respond and change and to be saved. This is a perfect picture of God, how God reaches out into the world by causing them to be afraid. Now, it might not be because Christians are Jersey Shore Calvary Chapel is armed and ready to invade, It's not like that. I mean, in a spiritual sense, maybe. But no, it's more like that the world is becoming less and less a place of hope for them as they see the systems of the world being weaker and weaker and falling apart. And as they look and they see the people of God not afraid of the world, and we're marching forward instead, conquering the ground, fulfilling our purpose as people. You see, the difference there is we're not afraid of the things that they're afraid of. You get it? And so that sends a message. So fear then is the beginning of wisdom, but Proverbs 1:7 becomes more specific, and we see that particular verse as a reality in Rahab, and it leads her to a place of salvation. It says that the fear of God is the beginning of knowledge. Knowledge is truth. And Jesus said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. So it's one thing to be afraid, which is the potential for wisdom, which then leads to knowledge. But who are you afraid of, and what are you afraid of? Well, if one fear is exchanged for a sense of awe and respect and a fear of God, well, then you put everything together. In other words, the fear of the world being judged one day and the judge of the world being God. And you say, I fear you, Lord, therefore I believe in you. And then knowledge will be given. That's a beautiful picture of Rahab's salvation and many other people in the world who get saved. Verse 10, for we have heard, Rahab, continuing her testimony about the God of Israel. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you, when you came out of the land of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were on the other side of the Jordan, Sihon and Og. And you utterly destroyed them, how you utterly destroyed them. She's now saying specifically that she believes that it was God who gave them the ability to defeat these two kings and their armies, but also the miracle. She's making reference of one of the major miracles that happened in the Old Testament. Again, not as it was some fictitious story meant to build up some new religion, as many people believe it was. No, as though it was a literal event, and that it actually happened, and word had gone out, and she speaks of it as giving testimony of the power of their God. And that sort of says something to me, is that, listen, we give testimony. No, you know what, listen. We don't see God, lately I haven't seen God literally split anything like the Red Sea and us walk through it and then our enemies swallowed up in it. But certainly we have our victories that we see as miraculous, And when people see that we believe what we believe, and when our testimony goes out, and our testimony is not a story about us, it's a story about God in us and how we've arrived at the place we're at. We all have very different stories. But it's when we tell that story from the point of view of this, then God did this, then God did this. People might criticize or disbelieve, but it leaves a mark on them when they hear that, especially when we really believe it. Then it really makes a difference. Testimony is an important way of communicating the power of God and what things he's done. Verse 11, and as soon as we heard these things, again, Rahab speaking from the point of view of her people, our hearts melted, and neither did there remain any courage in anyone because of you. So the faint-heartedness now is literally being defined as no courage in anyone because of you, the people of God. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Clearly now, she's giving a confession of her understanding on what point she's at in terms of the authority and the reach, the scope of the power and authority of God, specifically. Clearly a confession in truth of the all-encompassing authority of God on heaven above, on earth below. He is the God of gods, all-powerful. The question always is whose God is he? I mean, there you see a statement in there, your God, but then, of course, she's saying the reach and the scope of his power. In other words, Rahab, is he your God? I think she's making that choice before our very eyes. I want to be one of you people one day. And that's exactly what we see. We'll talk about in a minute. We'll talk about Hebrews 11. We'll talk about Matthew 1. But anyway, verse 12. But now therefore I beg you, this is the deal she strikes with them, swear to me by the Lord. And she chooses that very carefully because since she's confessed who she believes he is, she doubts that they would make a swear by him or swear in his presence or an oath in his presence that they would easily give up on because they fear him the same way she does. Since I have shown you kindness in preserving your lives, that you also show me kindness to my father's house, and give me a truth token, and spare my father, my mother, my brothers, my sisters, and all that they have. Deliver us our lives from death. And, verse 14, so the men answered to the two spies, we're never really told who they are. There's been speculation for years, but we don't know who it is. And they say this, our lives for yours. You saved ours, we'll give you yours. If none of you tell this business, and that condition will be repeated later on in the chapter. If you tell this business of ours to no one, and it shall be when the Lord has given us the land that we will deal kindly and truthfully with you. Now this woman, Rahab, in entering this deal, then finds herself translated, as I mentioned before, into the community of Israel. And she converts into their system of faith and worships their God. How do I know that? Well, I'll begin with Hebrews chapter 11. We call it the Hall of Faith. And toward the end of the chapter there, verse 31, throughout the chapter we're given a list of various patriarchs and men from the history of Israel and how their type or kind of faith is an example or a sample of what the faith in God does for a people of God. But there in verse 31, she's brought into this picture, and it says, by faith, the harlot, the hooker, Rahab, did not perish with those who did not believe. Because why? Because she did believe. She did not perish because she did believe. When she had received the spies with peace, she brought them in, kept them safe, and sent them on their way with peace. Verse 15. Then she let them down, we're back in now chapter 2 of Joshua. Verse 15. She let them down by a rope out of the window, and her house was on a city wall, so once they were down off that rope, they were outside the city walls and were able then to escape. And she told them to go by way of the mountain, lest the pursuers find you along the way, and hide there 3 days until the pursuers have returned here, and then you can go your way back across the Jordan to your people. So the men said to her, we will be blameless. Now, we're going to continue to make sure we understand this oath and this agreement that we have. we will be blameless of this oath of yours, which you have made us swear, unless, when we come into the land, you bind this line of scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and unless you bring your father, your mother, your brothers, and all your sisters into your house. So, as early as the first century now, as early as the first century AD, Christian commentators were already jumping on this scarlet-colored cord as a type of salvation in Christ. And it's been all along, and I agree with them 100%. It's a type or a picture of there is no salvation apart from the blood of Christ. And so Rahab, certainly this became a symbol or a type. You tie this cord, you hang it out the window, and that's how our army will know. Listen, we'll take our responsibility. We'll go back over. We'll make sure the entire army knows. When you see that red cord hanging out of the window, that household, everyone in that household is not to be touched. The only household there is. I mean, wouldn't it have been funny if they'd have come back and every window all around the city had red cords hanging out of it, Not the case. Only one household with faith, right? So it shall be that whoever goes outside the doors of your house into the street, his own blood shall be on his own head and will be guiltless. And whoever is with you in the house, Now this reminds me of Exodus, Reminds me of put the blood on the doorpost, on the left, on the right, on the lintel, and the spirit of death, the angel of death will come through the village or through the town, and everyone with the blood over the doorpost, your firstborn male will be saved. Everyone who does not have it, theirs will be taken. Salvation by blood, right? Passover. If you tell this also, they say in verse 20, tell this deal to anyone, and then we're freed from the oath which you've made us swear. So keep it a secret, and we'll know by that. The fact that you've kept it a secret, by the scarlet thread, and everyone in your house will know that you're serious. We'll know that there's intent, there's purpose. You've converted to belief in our God rather than that your gods. Verse 21. She agrees. Then she said, according to your words, so be it. And she sent them away, and they departed. And then she bound the scarlet cord in the window. Rahab would later marry, if you didn't know this, a Hebrew named Salmon, and become then part of Joseph's literal genealogy and connect Jesus specifically to the throne of David and to the tribe of Judah because of this. And so she has become part of the overall picture. Isn't that amazing? How God would take this Gentile woman whose way of life was absolute, complete sin, and because of her fear of God, would turn her life around and convert her completely and make her part of the history and genealogy of Jesus. It's mind-boggling. You see, God can redeem anyone and anything, and I don't care what you've done. It doesn't matter what you've done. Just like Rahab, you can become part of a larger picture, an important part of a major story that God is finishing. He's not done finishing yet, And so never let your past sin convince you that God cannot or will not use you, because God can take you and redeem everything that you are, and through his mercy and grace put a mantle and a calling on you and use you. Well, they departed, verse 22, and they went to the mountain as she had suggested. They stayed 3 days until the pursuers returned back within the city walls. Then they knew it was safe for them to go back, and they did go back. They didn't find the men. So 3 days, remember now, 3 days was the amount of time that they were told to wait, because in 3 days you'll be going across the Jordan to possess the land. Chapter 1, verse 7, right? Or 10 or whatever it was. So verse 23, the two men returned to the other side of the Jordan to Joshua, and descended from the mountain, crossed over, and they came to Joshua the son of Nun, and they told him all that had happened, befallen them. And they said to Joshua, quote, truly the Lord has delivered all the land into our hands. For indeed, all the inhabitants of the country have become faint-hearted because of us, because of God bringing us this far, and the fact that we're here already. So the spies probably thought that they were going to Jericho. Think about this for a second. When the spies went out, they probably thought, no, we're going to Jericho to gain some, with our eyes, to gain some tactical advantage. We're going to go in as a couple travelers. We'll take up, at some house somewhere, we'll get a look at what we're up against. And we'll find some weakness, and we can go back and report and gain a tactical advantage. So when we come in to conquer the land, we'll have something to help us. They gained no tactical advantage whatsoever. What they brought back, though, was a tremendous advantage. They had confidence that God had already gone ahead of them. What gave them that idea? The faint-heartedness of the enemy gave them that idea. The stories, the testimonies, the reports of all the things that God had done to get them so far, they're only there. They're just on the other side of the Jordan. And what they had to go through to get there. Listen, people know, if people who don't believe in him, they know of him. They know of him. He's a powerful God. And as they now knew that God had already gone ahead, they now know that they can go fight. And now in this particular battle, there was no bloodshed as far as they were concerned, right? We know it. We'll later find out. We'll later go over that story. Amazing story. We'll eventually get to that. But God had already gone before them. But they still had a march, didn't they? Amen?